And I'm recording now. So I'll get back into screen sharing. I'll have all these talks put up on our class shell. So they'll be sorted by date. So back to screen.
Thank you, that will help.
Pardon me?
Sorry, thank you, that will help.
Oh, good, good. Let's get back to here. So, this seeing and so all these 3 bullet points here are what interfere with our seeing in depth. These 3 bullet points here allow us to kind of start to think to see with purpose. And that's the habit you want to get into. So here, look at the ordinary, everyday items that surround you. Common, familiar objects like kitchen utensils, doorknobs, faucets, telephones often contain visually exciting elements. When I say telephones, I'm not talking about the cell phone. It's the old style telephone. I still have one of those in my house. These often contain visually exciting elements. Make believe you've never seen the item before and know nothing about its function. Just kind of look at it as though you're coming from Mars and start to look at it in detail, in depth. Analyze each separate aspect of the object's appearance. Is its shape or a section of its shape visually exciting? Does the item possess a dynamic curve, angle, surface, or textural pattern? And so just don't look at it in one gulp and take it in. Really take a look at it. Once again, for lines, shapes, textures, all that will go into making a visually exciting photograph. After you've carefully studied the object, view it through the camera. Within the camera, you have powerful tools to record the object true to your experience, and these are things we're going to be going over today. Camera to subject distance, viewing angle, shutter speed, and depth of field. And so start to just look at the world around you and start putting together in a visual way that world in a visually exciting way. We aren't doing an assignment here. I should have axed that out of here, so don't worry about the assignment. We're coming down into, I used to, back in the day when I used to teach film photography, I would have students get a, a 3x5 card and write five icons on the back on this card and tape the card to the back of their camera. But in this day and age of digital photography, where you've got your monitor back there, your screen, I don't have students tape that. But it's a good idea to maybe, take these icons down that I'll be describing in a minute and take those out to the field with you, just to remind you of how to approach your subject. As I suggested to you, maybe I'll show you a photo or two that I took last spring of approaching a subject and talk about how I approached that subject through the photo I took. So as I suggested to you last time, I just don't look at my subject through the viewfinder. I start at the edges of the viewfinder and I let my attention go around the viewfinder, deeper into the viewfinder until I'm on my subject. I'm looking at all the visual elements that fill that viewfinder of the camera, or in this case, the viewfinder of your cell phone, if you've got one there in a sense. And so start there. Really pay attention of what's filling that space within your camera, within the sensor, and know how all those different elements are working to make your photograph. So the first thing we'll describe with an icon is camera to subject distance. The second thing we'll be describing is angle of view. The third thing is compositional placement. Where are you placing your main subject within the viewfinder? Are you using your camera in a horizontal or vertical format? And then finally, the pictorial moment. And so I'm going to click on over to the whiteboard, and I was scribbling on that before class. Let's see if it's still there. Yes, it is. So here are these 5 icons that, so do you guys see the whiteboard now?
Yes.
Okay. Here are these 5 icons that I'm having you think about. This represents camera to subject distance. This guy right here is this X is your subject. And what this is suggesting is how close or far are you from the subject? If you are far from your subject and taking a picture, go ahead and take that picture. And then walk closer to your subject. And you're going to see that things change within your viewfinder when you do that. And when you get really close to your subject and all other external information is left out of the viewfinder, when you're that close, oftentimes the subject becomes abstract. And that's really a lot of fun, taking photos where it's an abstraction of what you're photographing. Someone will remember that first image we looked at when I was talking about the language of photography. Was that first photo of just that round shape, and it looked like an eye was looking out at you. That's that idea of getting closer to your subject, removing other information, and it becoming abstract. We didn't know it was kind of a cabbage we were looking at, and it didn't matter. It had a presence though. And so this idea of just don't approach your subject, look at it, put it up through the viewfinder and go click. Your job hasn't stopped there. Get closer to your subject. Or if you're close to your subject and you're exploring it, back up and see what happens when you get further away from your subject. So this, once again, is the idea of seeing your looking at your subject in depth, seeing it for all its visual attributes. The second so this is the camera to subject distance. So camera to, and I'm just going to put sub distance. This one here is angle of view. Just don't pull out your camera and go click and then get close to your camera subject and go click again. Move all the way around your subject. Look at it from the front, from the sides, from behind. Fully explore your subject. Then explore your subject from high to low, a bird's eye view. That's supposed to be an eye there. Then look at your subject from a low, kind of worm's eye view of the world. So fully explore your subject, moving around it, looking from high to low and low to high. You're going to start to make visually interesting images. Questions thus far?
Does any of these icons represent the background, foreground, or middle ground in the camera?
Nope. Not at all. It's just what's in your viewfinder. So if you're here close to your subject, well, you're probably not getting much foreground or background information there. So as you step further back from your subject, Izzy, you're going to start to see more foreground and background. And as you step further back, you're going to see more and more foreground and background. So it depends upon where you are at in exploring your subject. You may have foreground and background, or you may not.
Oh,
But
I see.
definitely explore it. So as you moving in and out, you're going to be limiting and expanding what you have in your foreground and background. This is just your camera relative to where it is distance-wise from your subject. And then this is you with your camera moving around your subject. And the term I use oftentimes at this point in the lecture is I don't like to have students explore their subject with locked elbows and locked knees. Get loose, get low, get high, move around your subject. So this was angle, that's an angle symbol, we'll say angle of view for this second icon here. The third icon here is compositional placement. I'm just going to put comp because it takes too long to spell out. Comp placement. For this third icon. And what this is saying is no bullseyes. You don't want to have a bullseye in your viewfinder. In other words, if this is your viewfinder, that which you're looking at, that which is framing your subject, what beginning students oftentimes do is they'll place their subject smack dab in the middle of the viewfinder. That's just where your attention goes. That's where you place your subject. You don't typically want to place your subject smack dab in the middle of the viewfinder. What you want to do with compositional placement is you want to, in your mind's eye, divide your viewfinder up into thirds vertically and up into thirds horizontally. So I've just divided the viewfinder up into thirds vertically, or I mean horizontally. Now I'll do the same vertically. And what you want to do is, once again, don't place your subject smack dab in the middle of the viewfinder. Rather, place your subject in the intersection of one of these 4 points where you've divided the viewfinder up into thirds horizontally and vertically. What that'll do is when you place a subject smack dab in the middle, it's visually awkward. And it doesn't give really emphasis to the subject or that which is around the subject. So in dividing your viewfinder up into thirds, you'll work like this. I'm going to go ahead and get the eraser here. I think I've got an eraser tool for my, where is that? Oh, there it is. So I'm going to go in and erase this a little bit, and erase this here, and this. In fact, I'll erase all these. So, in fact, I'm going to make this viewfinder a little bit bigger so I can draw on it. So, I've got my viewfinder here. Oops, wrong. I've got my viewfinder. And this is the example I always give. I'm out on a sailing boat. I could put that sailing boat smack dab in the middle of the viewfinder, like this, but it's a visually awkward placement. So what I want to do is, once again, in my mind's eye, divide this viewfinder up into thirds and then place the boat somewhere within one of those intersection points, which would be roughly right in here. Let's say the boat is moving this way and I want to emphasize sky. Which one of these points do you think I'd want to put my boat into? Would it be point 1, point 2, point 3, or point 4? What do you guys think out there? We know it's not going to go in the middle. It has to go into one of these intersecting points, and the boat is moving this way, and I want to emphasize sky. Which
I
point?
think it would be moving in
3.
Point number
3.
Yes, that was 3, and Jasper was saying 3 too. Is that correct, Jasper?
Yes.
Yes. Why is that, Jasper? Why would you want to put the boat here? And you're absolutely right.
If you're putting it lower, you have more room for the sky, so you can really emphasize that sky. And if you're wanting to emphasize that it's moving to my right, then it wouldn't really make sense to have it on the other side where it's moving. You wouldn't really have a lot of room to see that boat.
Beautiful. You nailed it there, Jasper. Good job. With this placement here, as Jasper said, I'm emphasizing sky. And because the object is moving this way, you tend to want to put objects that are moving, you want to tend to, as Jasper said, put more space in front of that moving object. If you put the boat, let me back this up. If you put the boat here, as Jasper said not to do, once again, the boat is moving left to right, it would be moving out of the frame. It would be visually kind of awkward looking relative to how it looked in point 3. So Jasper was absolutely right. That's where you're wanting to put the boat. And anything else, if you had a cat, dog, whatever, you'd be thinking about putting that subject somewhere in one of these intersecting points. And you're thinking about space in front of the object, behind the object, above and below the object. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let me get rid of this. So once again, the icon here would be no bullseyes. Now let me say this, guys. These are kind of rules I'm giving you. And rules are meant to be what?
Broken.
Exactly.
What? Really? I can do that and not get in trouble?
You absolutely can. But you want to be thinking about it. Whatever you're doing, composition is about organizing visual elements. And you're thinking about, is this organization working best or not? And so there are photographs I have where the subject is smack dab in the middle because that's where it made most sense. But for the most part, at the very least, think about that rule of thirds. And that, by the way, that box, I don't know if I called it out or not, with the intersections, that's called rule of thirds. You're breaking up your subject into thirds, horizontally and vertically, the rule of thirds. So this was compositional placement. This is horizontal or vertical format. And so many people will approach their subjects with their camera in the horizontal format. And that's how they always approach their subject. But let's say you're photographing a tree, and let me come off of screen sharing here for a second. So here I am with my camera. Most people are approaching their subject with the camera in the horizontal format. But let's say I'm photographing a tall tree or the Statue of Liberty or tall building. Well, remember, you've got the vertical format that you can photograph in too. So just don't think about horizontal, think about vertical. That's going to be true with your cell phone capture too. Your cell phone can capture horizontally and vertically. If you're using your cell phone for video capture though, don't capture, you've all seen YouTube videos where video is captured in the horizontal format with a cell phone. Don't capture it in the horizontal format. For video use, you always wanted to capture in the, I'm sorry, you don't want to capture in the vertical format with video. You always want to capture video in the horizontal format. With cameras, you've got an option here. So remember to use and think about that option.
Okay.
And then the final whiteboard thing is this one here. And this is called the pictorial moment. And that's one of those 5 bullet points on the second page of this handout that I gave you. So this is the pictorial moment. And if any of you think you can write better than me with this mouse, please do. It's terrible. At any rate, this is the precise moment that the subject reveals itself to you as fully and completely as it can. You've followed all this, you've thought about all this, and then compositional concepts that we'll be talking about in a few minutes. You've followed all this, and the photo comes to this pictorial moment, to this big exclamation point. That's an exclamation point, where everything is properly and beautifully framed. And that's when you go click with your camera. So that's the pictorial moment, the perfect moment when all visual elements come together. So some questions.
So even though that we're using like the tall tree thing, can we go under the tree and go forward? Will that be what kind of a view? Is it pictorial or the one that looks like an L?
Well, it could be a combination of all of these, certainly, Izzy. And so if you're looking to photograph a tree, you can photograph it straight on, of course. But then you'd want to go around and look at it for all its visual elements. It might be hard to climb the tree to get above it, but Izzy, I think I heard you say you could get below it. So here you are laying on your back with your camera out, kind of pointing up at the tree. So that would be representing this one. And now whether it's in the horizontal format, I couldn't say. It would depend upon where all the branches of the tree were going. And then you'd scoot yourself around a little bit until you got to the pictorial moment and all the visual elements from the tree to come together, and that's when you go click. So these aren't distinctly separate moments. They all kind of merge together as you're exploring with your camera. Does that make sense, Izzy?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, betcha. So let's see. I'm gonna open up my Lightroom here that I thought I had open, but apparently did not. And got the right class. Yeah, good. So I'm going to go back to screen share and bring up Lightroom. Okay. Okay. I got the spinning wheel of death going on for some reason. There we go. And play. So what we're going to be looking at here are both photographs and paper cutouts. The paper cutouts, so a lot of these here are going to be paper cutouts that we look at through here. So these are paper cutouts to illustrate points I'm making. And so with the paper cutouts, the reason I'm working with paper cutouts is I want to just break everything down to line and shape. That's the first thing you're kind of looking at when you're breaking this visual world that's around us down into a way that we will then approach our subject, whatever that subject may be. And so here, the frame, and is everybody looking at this piece of white here and then kind of dark down here? Are you all seeing that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So here, the viewfinder goes from here and it continues down to here, where my mouse is at. So we've got a white shape and we've got this dark shape right here. The world, in this case, has been simply broken up into two shapes, this white rectangle and this long dark rectangle, and we have but only one line. So this particular image has one line in it, and then because the viewfinder of your camera here, it has created a shape. Your camera will create shapes actually within that which you're photographing. In this case, the viewfinder has created this larger white rectangle, and then it's also created the darker rectangle down here. Of course, the world continues beyond the frame and would be something different. And this is the idea of the language of photography, how the world around us is converted onto a two-dimensional plane. So what do you think? Can you create an interesting photograph with just something as basic as this? Or would this just be too basic and too boring? Any thoughts?
I think you can make it interesting if you give it a certain meaning.
Exactly. If there's and that's a very important way to put a word to put in there, feeling or atmosphere. You want your audience to respond to something. Next couple images. So based on this concept, we're going to look at a Japanese photographer. And the next couple images we're going to look at, he prints these fairly large. These images are maybe 2.5 by 3.5 feet. So they're good size images. And he's photographing the ocean. Think about how many different ways you can photograph an ocean. He's photographing it where he stripped it down to just 2 shapes and nothing else. So we can't go from this into his vision. Right there. That's the ocean right there. That's the horizon line. It's a foggy day out there. Once again, these images are meant to be shown in the classroom, damn it. The resolution of them is quite small here on the screen. At any rate, you can see the image. And so with all his images that he's done with this ocean series, he puts the horizon line smack dab in the middle. And then he has this illuminating light coming out from the ocean that creates, I think, very interesting images. Once again, imagine these being 2.5 by 3.5 feet. And so just 2 shapes here. The horizon line of the ocean, and then that which the viewfinder of the camera is capturing. And these become very meditative. Maybe on break, I'll pull up his webpage so we can see these images bigger. These are very meditative pieces, but beautiful and captivating. So we're just starting with shape. We're just starting with line, and lines make up shapes. So here we have lines. We've got 3 vertical lines. And then there are also horizontal lines. Let's see, I thought I had a horizontal line in here. Apparently I don't. Oh, did I have a horizontal? Yeah, there's a horizontal line right there. The horizontal line is the most restful line there is out there. So we thought what these cutouts are doing is they're simply cutouts of shape, but they carry an emotional trigger feeling to them. And so a horizontal line is the most restful line there is. Horizontal when you sleep, horizontal when you're dead. That's the most restful you can be. And so there are horizontal lines. Then there are vertical lines. These are the second most restful lines. They do have more potential energy, though, than a horizontal line. A horizontal line lays flat, it's on the ground, it's at rest, and it's not moving at all. But a vertical line has some potential energy to it. It could fall over. So you have a little bit more energy built into a line when it is vertical relative to horizontal. You can add stability to these vertical lines by adding a horizontal line. So once again, nothing but lines making up shapes, and these shapes themselves become big lines. So the positive space here, you might say, is the dark, and the negative space is the white. And so these dark lines have more stability than a horizontal line on its own. When you put a horizontal line with vertical lines, you have more stability yet. The most dynamic lines out there are going to be diagonal lines. These dark shapes here are diagonal lines. And that's an example of diagonal lines giving greater visual energy to the photo. Imagine if these lines are just dead horizontal. Same subject. Our subject has been put into, using the rule of thirds, our subject has been put right here, walking out of the photograph. So a little bit more awkward than if it was put here visually. So we're talking about visual awkwardness, not subject awkwardness, but visual awkwardness. And so with this one here, we have the subjects walking out a little bit more visual awkward than if they're placed down here. If you can imagine these lines being dead horizontal, you'd have a less dynamic photograph. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
And the photographer could have swung his or her camera over here to capture those horizontally if he or she wanted to. Same thing going on here. This is a much more dynamic photo of a building with these diagonal lines coming out relative to just having horizontal and vertical lines. So lines have energy. Most least energetic, horizontal. The next least energetic, vertical. And the most energetic are diagonal lines. And so getting back into here, how many lines were in the, were in front of the camera here that you can see? How many lines?
2.
Just one line, actually. This line here, that's the only line. It's the line that divides the bright part of our subject area and the dark part of our subject area. That's the only line.
Oh, I thought that you count the black space, kind of like when I'm painting.
That would
A
be,
line would refer to a border, wouldn't it?
exactly, it's bordering the light and dark shape
Yeah,
here.
it's a border.
This would be like the ocean water itself, and this would be the ocean sky if that photographer put his camera at a diagonal. Rather than having that line go horizontal in the ocean, he could have tilted his camera to where this is ocean, this is sky. There is only one line out there in front of him, that horizontal line of the ocean itself. But the camera here has created two shapes, and those shapes are what? Triangles. We have two triangles here that were created by the frame of the camera itself. So the camera will create shapes, and be aware of that. So I put this in here to illustrate this point. We've got this, I'll call image, photograph, and we've got this image, photograph. Go back to that one and take a look at that one. Now, let's say you were hiking. You got your hiking boots on. Do you want to be in this photo here, or, oops, drop, this photo here, or this photo here? Number 1 photo or number 2 photo? What do you think, guys?
Number 2.
Number 2 photo?
Yeah, because I already climbed the mountain.
Exactly. That's what we do. We tend to read left to right in the West. If we were in one of the Asian countries, they might say they want to be on this one because we read left to right, they read right to left. And so we tend to read a photograph left to right. And think about that when you're composing. We tend to read a photograph top left to right oftentimes and top to bottom, especially when we put photos together. So when we get on to our first project with the digital camera and we're in the classroom and we're critiquing your work, how you put your images together will help us read what you want us to get from your work. And so here, we're reading. This is what we do in the West automatically. We read left to right. And yet, most people would rather be here. On my mountain bike, I kind of like climbing mountains on my mountain bike. I really enjoy that. That's how I get some good exercise in. But really, I want to be here, zipping down the mountain. So what we're looking at here is line. And then the camera creates shape. And then how we read a photograph. or a set of images. And so all of a sudden, something simple becomes complex once you start to think about it. Moving on, let's see, we've got a shape here, and a triangle here is one of the most stable shapes we've got. To make it less stable, what do?
Extend out one of its sides.
Exactly. What we're going to do is put it like that. Now it becomes very unstable. So what is it that you're wanting to show in your image? Are you wanting to show stability or instability? You'll go ahead and compose for that. No right or wrong, it's what you want to say about your subject. So I've broken things down into, with this talk here, into lines and shape.
Okay.
Now we're moving on, and we're repeating this. And so here we have repeating pattern. This is one of the things that you'll be looking for on this very first assignment, repeating pattern. And which direction is this repeating pattern moving? Do you get a sense of direction?
Yep.
What do you say? What do you think?
I think I see a sense of direction moving left to right.
Exactly. Left to right and bottom to top, moving this way here.
Kind of like a pathway coming from a corner.
Exactly. Yes, perfect. And our brains put that together. Without me saying there's a movement or sense of direction here, our brain, and telling you what that is, our brains are programmed to see that. And you've got to break that three-dimensional world that's in front of your camera. You got to break that three-dimensional world up into its visual components to give us meaning within this photograph you're taking.
It also looks like it's getting farther off with how small they're getting towards the end.
Beautiful. Good point there. And you're absolutely right. Intuitively, if we knew these all to be roughly the same size in the real world, well, the further something is in the distance, the smaller it is. So this is giving us that sense of direction too, of movement also. And that can be seen in this photograph here. And who said the objects were becoming smaller? I didn't see that.
That was me, Desiree.
Desiree, good job, Desiree. And that's exactly what we're seeing here, this movement going out this way. By the way, what an amazing photograph. I just find it
I just barely noticed the buildings in the foggy background.
Exactly. And that makes it visually interesting. That's what you're wanting to do with your camera. How can I make something that causes my audience to stop and look at the artwork first and then consider what's going on in it? What is the artistic impulse that created this work here? Let's see. Whoops. I'm going to pass over this for now. I don't know if I keep pushing the wrong buttons here. There I go again. Yeah, I'm going to skip over that. This is talking about visual placement of your subject. Does it go up top or does it go low? I'm going to come back and talk about that in something else. So here we've got a cutout. And what would you say is the subject of this cutout here? Any thoughts?
The red triangle.
Yeah, exactly. And we might say that is it because it's a bright color. Our eyes, and when I say our eyes, I really mean our brains. Our brains are they really discriminate on what we see. And they make us look at things and consider things. And the first thing we discriminate on is basically out in a field, color. If you see contrast in color, that's what your eye goes to. So that's when we see African wildlife, what's imprinted on the animal's body is not something in contrast. It blends with the field there. Anything in contrast stands out. So yeah, this stands out, and therefore is the subject. Would you say that if you were a parent, would you feel pretty comfortable with your kid standing, about here like this near a cliff? What do you think?
Probably not.
That
No.
would be
Nope.
a little more than mildly concerning.
Little, okay. Well, let's put it relative to something else. I grew up in Yosemite National Parks, and I must have given my brothers and I probably gave our parents heart attacks continually because we were up and down cliffs all the time. I'd feel pretty comfortable with my kids standing there, I guess. Oh, but now we do this. Would you want your kid to be this kid here or this kid here?
Oh, no.
Kid number one.
Yeah, the number one, exactly.
Definitely.
And why is
That
that?
first one looks a little bit like it's just resting there, like just kind of sitting by. The other one has the shape that makes it look like a leaning person.
Exactly.
Somebody's leaning over the edge. And
Yep.
you know that if you lean too far, there he goes.
Over that edge. And that got back to this idea of the triangle here. What are you doing with your, oops, where did that triangle go? That triangle there, that's what you're simply seeing here, is that movement to suggest something. And so here we've got this triangle is very stable at this point. That's quite stable. And by the way, I've been photographing people out along the Grand Canyon right at the rim. And when I'm out there, my heart goes into, my heart kind of comes up into my mouth with what people do there. I used to be pretty darn good with rock climbing, and the things I see people doing on these cliffs are quite amazing. And you do hear of people falling off the canyon. So here, my kid out by the Grand Canyon, I'm pretty comfortable. Here I'm not. And why is that? Well, somebody already pointed out that, yep, we've got some instability built into this shape here. Why else does this one feel more threatening relative to that one?
The shape itself.
Because
And-
there's no like surface in the bottom, so there's like a feeling of insecurity.
There's also
Definitely.
that the cliff looks a lot more jagged and
Down
kind of
here.
intimidating looking.
Like
Yeah,
a
much
sleeper
more
drop.
threatening.
It makes you
Also-
hope that there's water hiding down there.
Yeah, you can't see where it ends, so you don't know what's down there.
Exactly.
You hope
That's
that
worth it.
there's water and there's a miracle, but that's probably not it. So we
No.
wouldn't be able to know.
You're gonna be in hard shape if you fall off this one. Also, this one has less open space. You can
It's
see
also
we
at a
have
bit of
more
a
cliff
slant,
here
so they have a chance of like rolling down instead of just straight up falling.
going straight down. Also, I have a chance of stepping back here if I want. Whereas
Yeah.
this cliff here, man, I'm right at the edge. I don't have much room to step back. Also, there's much more space for me to fall into here relative to here. So here, based on lines that make up shape, we're getting two emotionally different reactions. Moving on. Here's this idea of no bullseyes. Here is our subject. All this dynamic stuff is around our subject. It's happening around our subject, but it feels kind of static. Our subject's sitting in the middle. So simply by working in the rule of thirds, we get this. And you get a sense that visually, this is more dynamic than this. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get
Yeah, because it's giving balance to the dark versus the white in the area, or how it's like placed.
Yep.
And by having
Overlapping, if you look at it, you overlap your subject with your white and black, and you're creating actually a push and pull versus just being in the middle.
Static.
There's also that since it's in the corner instead, it has more of a sense of like location or distance to it.
Yep.
Like that thing over there, you should notice it rather than just the first one where you immediately know.
Bam. It's there in your face. And with this one too, we get a sense of movement. Here, we get a sense of movement maybe happening all around our subject. Here we get that sense of movement happening left to right, high to low. So with the, once again, a bunch of diagonal lines that play here, placement of the subject, we get a very dynamic looking image. based on just 3 different cutouts here, or really 2 cutouts placed on a black field. And so here we're looking at some of Sagato's work, which we looked at last week, and he does not want to give a sense that these people are at rest. These people being these gold miners. They are constantly moving like ants. And so when you look at a lot of his images, this is a line. Oops, excuse me. Drat. No, I'm just gonna leave it like this, I think. Nah, let's go back to the slideshow. When you look at his work, it's gonna be hard to find just horizontal and vertical lines. Much of his work just is all about diagonal lines. Come on. Things are moving slow here today for some reason. There we go. And so you got the lines of the ladder. Those are lines. You've got implied lines of the men. These are implied lines where our brain is connecting the dots. And so these are lines. This is a line. These are lines here. We've got lines coming in this way. We've got lines coming in this way. And so lines are important. They're going to be the basic, kind of the basic visual element that you begin with when you're organizing your subject. And then I'll mention it here too. Another aspect of composition is texture. And this grittiness, the sweat and dirt on this guy really gives us a sense of this place and what it's like to work here. So texture is going to be a compositional element that you'll look for. Here's an example of working in the rule of thirds, breaking your viewfinder up into thirds horizontally and vertically, and putting the most important part of the image, the eye in this case, in that third, in that intersection there. And just an amazing image. Everything is looking into the guy's eyes, which we oftentimes say is looking into the soul of the person. Eyes of
Get a real sense of tiredness.
definitely
Too.
just kind of giving up the ghost. Doesn't want to live anymore. You'll see more of this guy's work sometime through the semester, and it is. I may have already. No, I haven't shown it yet. It's heart-wrenching. Visual balance. Balance is one of the toughest things to say. A plus B equals visual balance. But when it comes together in the viewfinder, it makes sense visually. So right now, I would suggest this image actually has visual balance. The elements are coming together. Cover up the small white triangle with your hand in the lower left-hand corner. Do you get a sense that there's balance in the image now? Not so much. I get a sense the energy is kind of falling over to the left. The energy of just these 2 elements here, the red rectangle and the periwinkle, I guess, periwinkle circle.
When I see it with the white triangle, it looks like the circle is about to bounce off and to the right of the red piece. But when I cover the white, it definitely looks like the whole thing is just falling, like it's a table falling with something that was on it that's also falling with the movement.
Very nice. I like that, Amelia. That was Amelia, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good observation. So you could just see by removing or adding just one element there, we have an image that is visually balanced or unbalanced. And I'm just breaking things down to basic shapes and such to emphasize this idea of composition. And so here we've got something kind of similar going on visually, where everything comes together in a balanced way, even though we've got a lot of different chaos going on here. It has visual balance to it.
Oh, wow. This one has a lot of overlapping.
Stuff going on. Yeah, we've got the street. We've got a street sign. There are shadows at play here. And this is the idea of moving in closer to your subject. Camera to subject distance, that first icon. Step back 10 feet, and boy, all of a sudden you see a park, you see a street bench, and you see a street sign, and it puts you in context where you are. This is very abstract, moving in closer to your subject, and then framing it in such a way that there's visual balance across it with all these just chaotic shapes. A triangle here, kind of a triangle there, another triangle here. We've got this kind of F shape going on here. We've got this shape here. There's endless shapes going on here, and they're all coming together in a visually interesting way. Tough photograph to make, come together. We'll see this image probably a little later on in the class. I'm trying to remember why I put it here. Oh, for visual balance. I'll talk about this now and then talk about it again. So here we have this, so I'm getting off topic a little bit here. With your camera, with your digital camera, you're going to be able to tell the camera what is in focus and how much of the visual plane is in focus. In other words, we've got a foreground here of this young girl and a background image of her friend. She's out of focus, she's in focus. Where does your eye go to this image? Where does your eye first go to this image?
The one,
The girl in the back.
the girl on the back, yeah.
But why? She's smaller. Our eyes go to
Focus.
what is bigger in an image. Why is our eye going to what is small?
She's in
Because
focus.
Because she's more clear.
She's the one who has more contrast compared to the girl in front, which is blurry, even
Exactly.
though she's the bigger one.
Exactly. So all of you chimed in, nailed it. She's out of focus. Our eyes snap to what's in focus in an image. And now our eyes can come back and kind of take her in, but our eyes keep getting snapped back to her in the background. At any rate, I see visual balance here. I have an active eye moving back and forth between the two forms. Cover the image of the smaller girl up a little bit, and you'll see that the image feels a little unbalanced visually. Talking about visual balance. Put that element back in, and we've got visual balance coming back into play. So when you're looking at images, start to remove, cover the image with your hand. Start to remove elements, and then see what happens when you put the element back in. And that'll start to kind of train your eye. When I say eye, once again, it's not your eye that's being trained, it's your brain. It's your brain that sees and perceives. Your eyes just simply transfer information. So here, my mind, my brain is able to find visual balance within this image by having that element right there. But a gorgeous image. I love just how this is out, how she is out of focus here. Just adds a great sense of mystery to the image. So we've got this mountainscape, landscape here, and we've got this one. Which one would you rather be hiking on?
Softer one.
Yeah, this one here. Just a nice, easy hike. This becomes more of a mountain climbing adventure going through here. Shapes of lines. This is a line, remember. I'm still kind of stuck on lines. We have only one line here. And this line is breaking up the negative and positive space. And I'll talk about negative and positive space. Well, I can talk about it now. If I was to ask you guys, so we've got a line here that's breaking up the white and the black. If I was to ask you what the negative space was, what would that be in this image? And you guys may not know what the definition of negative and positive space is, which is fine. That's why I'm going to define it now. And
Would it be the black?
I think the negative is the white part.
The white.
white. And I think that is Jasper said the black.
Yes.
Why do you, and I'm agreeing with Jasper here. So let's work out, let me ask Jasper why he feels that that is the positive space and the white is the negative space. Why do you think the black is the positive space there, Jasper?
For one thing, I feel like I associate negative with the color black. That's one reason. I just kind of feel like the white is creating the shape of the black.
Okay. What the definition of negative positive space is, the positive space, and I'm sorry, I got myself mixed up there. I call the black the positive space and the white the negative space. What the definition is of negative positive space is whatever it is, whatever we're looking at here, the positive space lays on top of the negative space. So if I'm looking at this as a mountain, a hill, it is laying on top of the sky, you might say. And so here, the black is the positive space and the white is the negative space. If you were to kind of flip your brain around and now the white is laying on top of the black, this could be somebody's leg, hips, torso going up towards the arm. This is just a photograph of a half of a torso here. If this is positive space and this is so the subject matter, it would be somebody's body laying on top of a black carpet. That would be positive space, negative space. If you look at this as a mountain, this would be the positive space laying on top of the negative space. Does that make sense?
I'm a bit confused.
Yeah.
Okay, because I look at it and it looks like a body is reclining.
Yep.
So I see the lower back, and so
So
is the top negative then?
So positive space is your subject, whatever that might be.
The
So this
sub-
your
okay.
your positive space being the torso. Well, the positive space is the positive space is the torso, which is white, laying on top of the negative space, which is black. That's if you see the white space as a torso. If you see the black space as mountains, the black space is the positive space, laying on top of the white. The mountains are the subject. Does that make, and don't say it makes sense if it doesn't. Does that make sense?
I'm stumped.
It makes a little sense to me.
Okay, so let me see if I get this right, Professor. So let's say that the white is my canvas or the surface, and I already put the painting, and I just get my rag and just put that little line across it. So that's my positive space. Is that what you're saying when I remove the paint?
Well, if you're putting your paint onto white canvas, you've brushed on black, representing whatever.
Right. And then I come with my little, rag, and I put in the shape into my canvas. Does it make sense to you? Because that's the only way I can relate.
So Izzy, you start out with a white canvas. Are you painting your entire canvas black and then going in with your rag and removing the black here to reveal the white?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's usually how we paint.
Yeah. In which case, you're removing that. If the white is your subject, if the white space is making up what your subject is, that would be the positive space. But in this case, I suspect you're removing, you painted all this with black, you're going in with your rag and removing the black now from the canvas to reveal the white there. I would suspect this would be your positive space and this is your negative space.
Ah, okay, now it makes sense.
And so it's kind of fun. In fact, over break, I'll come in with those things that we've seen before. I don't know if I've got it in this lecture or not. I think I do in one of our lectures, in one of the slides here. I'll talk more about positive, negative space with slides that may make more sense with that. So you've all seen it before, the two vases that you either see kind of a face or two vases. We'll see that in a few minutes. So maybe I shouldn't have jumped the shouldn't have jumped ahead talking about negative and positive space. But for me, this would represent the sky, mountains. The mountains are my subject here. And this would be the negative space, positive space laying on top of the negative space. But we'll come back. If you're saying, oh, dang it, I still don't get it. Let's get an image where it's actually meant to be.
Okay.
So here, looking at this, my negative space is the sky. Positive space is the mountains here. You might say, I cut these out. These are paper cutouts. And so I cut the black out, and I'm laying it on top of the white. The black is the subject here, the mountains, positive space. White is the sky beyond. And so here, what this is doing is we're seeing just the effect. We've got a line here. We just have one line here, but it's a jagged line. The jagged line feels very different than this more rounded, graceful lines. So lines carry energy. Not only do they suggest horizontal, rest, line at rest, vertical, a line with a bit more energy, diagonal, lines with more energy yet. They can suggest a gracefulness or something completely other.
Okay.
So what type of lines are you looking for when you're out photographing? Let's see. This is just scale. We've talked about it a little bit. Here we've got two shapes. If I was to ask you which shape is closer to you, this one or this one, what would you say?
The one where the red triangle is larger.
Yeah. Objects that are larger in an image, painting, photograph, whatever, tend to be forward visually in space. Remember, we're looking at a two-dimensional plane here, nothing else. There is no depth within this, but you can experience the illusion of depth. That which is forward in an image tends to, is bigger, and that which is further in an image is going to be smaller. And we see that with this here. Here we've got these people, she's smaller than him, certainly, but we get a sense that this person back here is further away because he is smaller than, certainly these two guys right here. So if you're wanting to give a sense of depth in an image, look for objects that are similar and have those objects go deeper into the landscape to suggest depth. And so that's all we're experiencing here. Scale, and how scale can give the illusion of depth. If I was to ask you to divide these up very quickly, you might be able to do it fairly quickly. You'd say, but I'm talking about visually. If I was to say, divide these up, you'd say circles and triangles. But to do it visually, it's tougher. We just see a bunch of red here. When we start to add other colors, color dominates. Remember I was suggesting to you our brains really work out differences within color and tones and that. Here, if I was to say divide things up, you'd have to pause for a second. You go, circles and triangles. Here, you go black and red immediately. Even though these red objects are different objects, circle and triangles. Even though these black objects are different, triangles and a circle, we are dividing them up based on color first. Whereas here, it's really tougher to get a sense of what we are dividing up. So oftentimes in a scene that you're composing, this is all about composition, you're looking for contrasts to make visual order. And that's what's going on here. One thing I do want to get into, and it was, let's see, where did I see it back here? I was going to talk about it. Oh, the visual triangle. And so I'm going to talk about visual triangles here. Our brains oftentimes go in and look at elements within a scene to make a visual triangle. This is what, by removing the white triangle down there, we've removed an element. By putting it back there, we've created what is called a visual triangle. We've got the circle, And now our eye goes down here. We've got the triangle. We come over here and we've got this rectangle. These three elements are creating a visual triangle. And photography loves visual triangles. This is a visual triangle right here. These three shapes, the heads, are creating this visual triangle. Then we get this outlander here that adds a little bit of awkwardness to the image. And so Eugene Smith was one of the most brilliant, his brain just could go in and photograph a scene and capture it for its visual elements, unlike anybody I've ever seen before. In my mind, he's one of the great photographers of the 20th century and 21st century. He could go in there and visually put things together, and boy, they make sense to us. So we've got this round shape here, we've got this round shape here, we've got this round shape here. And this is creating this visual triangle. When you have a visual triangle in an image, it becomes more visually dynamic to us, the viewer. Cover up that hat, and you'll see that the image becomes more static visually. Put the hat back in, and it's more dynamic visually. Same thing happening with these three Welsh miners. The visual triangle is at work. This is also a Eugene Smith photograph. And so because of scale, subject, we're really looking at this part of the image, and visually it's very dynamic for us as our eyes go back and forth between these three men. It's stable and at the same time dynamic. Same gain, cover up maybe the left-hand man, and the image becomes less dynamic and less stable at the same time for us. So composition in front of the camera becomes something that you've got to understand so that you can then apply it to your own photographs. Any questions or comments? Moving on then. Here we've got here we have three different colors. What is the negative and positive space yet? I don't know. If I was cutting out if I was cutting out periwinkle paper and red paper, those would be my positive. So we've got positive, negative space. The red and periwinkle would be my positive space, and the white certainly would be my negative space. We're going to talk more about that. Don't let me confuse you with that here. So here we've got a scene, and we've got the same scene coming up. When the same scene comes up, what do you look at? What are you looking at with this same scene, but what can you help not look at here?
The black square.
Black thingy.
Because it stands out in contrast to everything else. It stands out in contrast in tonality. These are kind of lighter tones, the periwinkle and red, and certainly the white. This is a very dark tone. This is something that's in contrast. It stands out in contrast in that these are kind of graceful shapes going through here. This is a very hard-edged shape. So when you're out photographing, if you want to emphasize something, oftentimes you're going to look for a contrast within the scene you're photographing to put that in there. So look for things that contrast. I'm skipping over some stuff right now. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to get into a story that we all know very well. Well, I think we all know it very well. Little Red Riding Hood. The story of Little Red Riding Hood. Here we have two shapes. One is Mom and one is Little Red Riding Hood. Yeah, okay, they work that way. They make sense visually. Mom's going to be bigger. Little Red Riding Hood is smaller. They are standing next to each other. I don't get a sense that this smaller shape here is further in the distance. Part of that reasoning is both are standing on the same ground. If this is a little bit further back, same size, but up the picture plane a little bit, I get a sense that this image that this element would be further back. And by the way, that is a compositional element. The further something goes up a picture plane, the further it recedes in space visually for us, even though it's on a two-dimensional plane here. So at any rate, we've got Little Red Riding Hood, but we want Mom to be a little bit more soft and pleasant looking. So shape affects how we feel about things. This shape is created by 3 lines. We want Mom to look a little bit more inviting to be a mom, so we'll make her a softer shape. But that's still pretty aggressive. So color will play an important part in how we read images. Now Mom is a little bit more inviting here. Now Mom is sending Little Red Riding Hood off into the woods. And here we've got some trees. And we understand that this tree here is in the foreground. This tree is in the background. And we've got some mid-ground trees here based on scale. So that sense of scale. We know that this tree is further back in the distance because it's smaller and it's further up the picture plane. And so all these elements make sense to us visually here. The positive space is the black representing trees, and the negative space is the white. Now to make the trees more complex, we're just putting in more triangles. Triangles, lines make shapes. Multiple shapes give us greater complexity. So here we are looking at the base of trees. Once again, we understand that this tree here is further in the background. I just got to take a quick peek here, see what's coming up. So we want to go ahead and put Little Red Riding Hood into the forest. So there she is. And we understand that she's coming in from the left here. If we wanted to make this forest a little bit more dynamic, maybe a little bit more threatening, what would we do with these lines right here? What might we do?
We could make them crooked, not perfectly straight.
Beautiful. More diagonal. Before we get there, though, and so we've got Little Red Riding Hood, and to make her feel more vulnerable, we want to make this forest more threatening visually. So one of the things we might consider is scale. Then the next thing that Jasper has pointed out is what we do with these lines. And so we want to tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood being vulnerable in this forest. And so scale might be the first thing. So at this point, well, she's become less vulnerable at this point because she's gotten bigger. So we make her smaller and she's a little bit more vulnerable within this forest. And then as we start to develop this forest and think about how we're going to compositionally put her in this forest, oh, there's that diagonal line. You could see that's much more static, much more stable visually relative to that. Now we've got these diagonal shapes. They're kind of leaning in towards Little Miss Red Riding Hood. And we're setting up a forest that is feeling more threatening. And that's what we want to get the feeling of, is a threatening forest here. Now we come in with the shape on the right-hand side. And what is that, by gosh? What's that shape that I just introduced?
The wolf.
Yeah, it looks like a wolf.
It looks like a wolf, but is it a wolf yet? Or is it just a happy dog in the forest?
It's a wolf.
The
It's
shadow.
It's not quite a wolf. It's a happy dog. He's out playing. How can we make this wolf more, well, threatening?
Teeth.
We could add teeth in there. Exactly. What shape would that?
Nice.
What shape should those teeth be to be threatening?
Very jagged,
Triangles.
like that other picture.
Triangles.
Yeah, jagged, triangles, pointy. So yeah, we'll add some pointy triangle teeth in there. How about the snout of the wolf itself? How about if we make that more angular? And then somebody said, put in an eye. So you guys are ahead of me here. Now we've made the shape of the wolf a little bit more aggressive, haven't we? This is my friendly dog. That's more of a wolf right there. Now we add in more visual information. There are teeth.
Run. Not really.
now we're getting into putting an eye in there. But this is kind of going back to a dog. This is a dog who just dropped a ball for you to throw again. So that's not a very threatening eye.
You'd have to turn it to make it look more like an angry eye.
Exactly. So we're going to reshape that eye. But a relationship has developed here between the wolf and Little Red Riding Hood based on color. So color is something that we will be playing with, as you'll be playing with as you go through the class. So there's that angular eye. Now we do have color. We are comparing the color, but it's not a color that is the same. It's a different color and a different shape. And now we're getting into more of the wolf. So we started with that. And just by composition, changing the shape of things, look at the lines a little bit differently. We've created something that is more threatening. Then the final thing we'll put in here is now we've got the relationship of here, the wolf is kind of looking around, sniffing, but now has got the scent and sees Little Red Riding Hood, and boom, the hunt is on. And now we just put in a little bit more information, and Little Red Riding Hood is in big trouble here. So all this that we've been looking at really is just lines and shapes, but they do tell a story. And what you want to do is plug into what lines and shapes do to tell the story that you want to tell with your camera.
Okay.
So let's just take a look at some of this at work now, just as far as lines and shapes and such. And so you, as a photographer going out, look at all the different shapes that are here. This is, of course, painted onto a wall, but we do have this rectangle. We have a triangle and another triangle and another triangle. Other triangles at play here. I love how the shadow's coming out of the trash can of the tree. So a lot is going on here compositionally. And oops, that was the end of that slideshow. That is just in a nutshell kind of what lines do, what lines make up shapes. How do you organize those shapes and lines into an emotional content? So we're going to continue on. What time is it? I'll yap at you a little bit more and then give a break in about 15 minutes or so. Any questions or comments?
No, sir.
All good?
I guess when we see in class, I can show you what I mean. I took a picture this morning, but it has like the little lines going from left to right. I guess I still confused a little bit from the, what is it called? The thingy that it was like a woman in the
negative positive space. Let me come back. Maybe I can clear that up now. Let me just see if that's in this talk here.
Maybe I have them backwards. That's why I just want to double check that I got it right.
I'm going to go online here and let's just bring up something that hopefully.
Sorry.
No. Good question there, Izzy. No, you're fine. I've got this somewhere in one of our slideshows, but I'm just going to bring this up now. So you're screen sharing. Are you seeing this this slide right now with the white and black?
Yeah, it looks like
Okay.
a road.
It's a vase. What we're looking at is a vase right here. Can you see that vase? This is a vase right here.
Is it
Where?
flat now? Is that what happened?
Well, I'm trying to have you look. So here's the image right here. We've got this black, sitting on top of the black is this vase shape. You see this vase shape in white?
No.
Oh,
No.
I'm on a
It looks
different,
like one way.
I'm on a different screen. Back to screen share. There we are. Now do you see it?
Okay, yes.
Okay.
That looks
That's
more
a
like
white vase right there, right? Can you see the white vase?
I saw faces at first.
I see two faces.
Yeah, okay.
If you saw it first as a white vase, that's the positive space. That's the subject. White sitting on top of a field of black. It's as though I took a white cutout and put it onto black paper. This is positive space. It's the subject, the vase. Now, someone said they saw a face. Where do you see faces?
Looking at
And
each
the
other.
two lips looking at each other.
On the side of the vase shape.
So this is a face right here. Nose, and lips, forehead, nose, and lips.
Yes.
That now is the black now is the positive space. It's laying on top of the white, the negative space.
Oh, okay. All right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a compositional element. And when you're out with your camera, oftentimes you might find yourself playing with negative and positive space. What is the negative space? What is the positive space? Typically, the positive space is going to be your subject. And then the negative space is that which is around your subject. And there are tons of examples of this. You know, if you're getting into graphic design, you're going to be all about positive and negative space, and just very interesting use of negative space with positive space. The letter N, and then this negative space here is in the shape of a dog, dog's ears and the dog tail coming out, howling at the moon. It just depends upon what you're looking at here. They're calling this the negative space white, the positive space black. Well, what would happen if your mind's eye flipped the positive, made the white the positive space versus the black? And your eyes are going to be seeing positive and negative space in very interesting, complex ways as you start to look at it. This is the same idea. This is that we were just looking at, a vase or a candelabra, but you could just see the effect of not negative and positive space through this, which is, I think, pretty darn interesting. So that's what I was meaning by positive and negative space. Let's go back.
Thank you.
You betcha. Screen share. So I think you. So I'm just going to run through and show lots of different images here. And I'll do it for another 10 minutes and turn you guys loose for a bit of a break. So we'll go until 2:15 and then you get a break. So can you see Lightroom now? Are you seeing the screen with Lightroom on it?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
A lot of slides here that have to be rendered. So when you're out with your camera and you do effectively start to break the world down into lines and shapes and form, and I'm going to give you a greater, in fact, dang it, I meant to do another different slideshow. So I'm going to let this render itself. stop share. I'm going to go to our modules, wherever I've got those hidden. It might be, oh, not that one. Here we go. So let me just mention real quick, these weeks aren't really truly fully broken up into what we're doing each week. I still got to get a sense of what I can do for next week, whether we can do a field trip or not. So we're still kind of working on week 1 Thursday module here. You're going to get your assignment today, and then what I'd like you to do is watch some videos on Snapseed. And then I'm next Tuesday, I think it is, I'm going to be introducing Snapseed to you, showing you how I use it. And so that'll be part of next week. So we're kind of on track with what we're looking at here a little bit, but a little off track too. So what we've got here is the language of photography, seeing in depth, getting caught up here. We've got this thing called a composition slideshow. I'll get into that. These are hopefully videos that you guys have been watching or will watch before you start to, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Before you start to get out with your cell phone to capture images for this composition assignment. I'll review the composition assignment, and then today I hope to get into this video of Michael Canutz. So what I did want to do is go to this composition slideshow, and I'm going to render it this way. And just go through it here. My computer, for whatever reason, I've seemed to lost Acrobat, which lets me open up PDFs. I'm gonna, when I get a chance, which I won't have coming up quick, I've got to get my computer down to IT and get them to load in Acrobat. I don't think I can open up this PDF. Let me see if I can. And I'm just gonna put this on the desktop. It'll play better if I can open it up as a PDF. No, it's just not going to open it up for me. Drat. So you guys can open it up as a PDF. It may play better for you, but you'll get the idea here of what it is I want you to see. So this talk is a composition. What is it? And so this is just another way of me to come at composition for you here. Success or failure, intrigues or interests the viewer. What you want to do is capture an image in a visually interesting way that pulls our attention in. It intrigues us, it interests us. And this is getting into visual elements, those elements that make up your image that communicates to the viewer. And so tips for composition. What is a visual element? The visual elements of line, shape, tone, color, pattern, texture, and form are the building blocks of composition. So we'll be looking over in this slideshow line, shape, tone, color, pattern, textures. What's the difference between shape and form? We'll look at that. And so the basic formal element of composition is line. Lines make up shapes. Lines direct the viewer's attention. Lines have an emotional content into them. There are vertical and horizontal lines. There are curved lines. That's what we saw in those cutouts. With this image here, we've got a series of visual elements in the scene that make up lines. When we connect these visual elements, they make up a line here and here. Here's another line. There are other lines built into the paving stones of the walkway here. So lots of lines are at play. Even she is a line. So the basic element of composition are lines. What are you doing with your lines? Let's see, and as I have here on your drive home, start to look at all the different lines that are out there. Lines can be curved. Curved lines tend to add a dynamic feel to the image. They tend to be graceful. Lines can be static, as we saw with that photo of the ocean, or they can be dynamic. Dynamic lines are, as we've talked about, are diagonal lines. So I've got a diagonal line here and another diagonal line here, and I've got lots of different diagonal lines here. These diagonal lines make up a shape, in this case a V. This whole thing is a leading line, and it's a leading line. It's leading us into the image. This line, and most leading lines work this way. They bring us into the image. The spiral line here is bringing us deeper down into the image. We get a sense of depth with both of these, with these different types of, with these lines, with these different types of lines. And so lines are such a basic part of composition. And so here we've got a graceful leading line coming into the composition. Here we've got these leading lines, not quite as graceful as this is a line right here. And then we've got this big black shape, that's a line. Here's another line, and we've got another line here. So we've got lines within lines, and these are graceful lines. Here are more kind of chunky lines at play here, more geometric shaped lines at play here. Lines make up shapes. Some graceful lines at play here, making up a shape. This line is connecting with that line. This line connects with this line down here. And then we get a certain flow of lines happening through that, that photo. Lines make shapes. And so shapes can come in all different sizes and shapes. And you can have shapes within shapes within shapes. So here we have shapes, self-contained designs within a larger composition. Shape, simple shapes infuse a photo with notes of order and sense. Shape, we recognize shapes, and oftentimes in photographs, they are abstract. So here we've got a shape and another shape. This is our positive space. The subject matter are these dark swans. They're making up a shape with the negative space. What shape are they making up together? What shape do you see there?
Kind of like a heart.
Exactly. Beautiful. A heart right here. So lines working with negative space can create shape. And so, and then these are very simple lines, and they infuse a certain sense of order within the image. They're very graceful. Here we've got a line, the sky itself, down into a slot canyon that's made up of these different shapes. So break the world down into line and shapes, and then you start to organize within your photo these lines and shapes for a certain content. What kind of shapes are natural? We're just looking at natural shapes here. Round shapes. Shapes that have graceful lines. These are the lines of nature at play. Oftentimes, though, you can have you can have geometric and organic. Geometric shapes really don't often appear in nature, whereas organic shapes like this are associated with nature. So these different shapes made up of lines have a certain meaning to us. Geometric versus organic. And so geometric shapes are hard-edged. They're human-made. They often play with different contrasts against each other. So these are geometric shapes. This is geometric shape, human made. That's graceful though. And we've got lots of repeating pattern here with these stairs.
That was a geometric shape that looked pretty organic, though.
Yep. And so the point of that is these are rules to think about, but they can be broken by gosh. So nothing simple about your composition, but understanding what lines do. Let me back up. And so you're absolutely right. What lines are doing, we can have this hard edge geometric shape, human made, also human made, but it feels more organic. Here we've got two kind of oval shapes at play, rectangle shapes at play. Then we've got the repeating pattern of the shadows at play. So these are nothing but lines making up shapes. Working in the rule of thirds, rather than put it smack dab in the middle. The salt and pepper shaker are put down into that lower quadrant. Oops, I've kept you 2 minutes over. Come on back when it is 2:20, 2:25. Come on back when it's 2:25. If anybody has questions, wants to talk about anything, I'll just hang out here.
I had a question, but it's not from this class. It's from the other class I have with you.
Which class is that?
History of art. History of art.
Yes.
So you posted a discussion that we had to answer.
Yes.
Just saying, yes, I read it. But for me, it was logged until the 23rd. Well, after the 23rd.
I'll go back and give you credit for that. That was 5
Yeah.
credit. I saw a few people did miss that, and you being one of them. So I'm glad you pointed it out. I'll go back and give you 5 points credit there.
Okay. Oh, I also sent an email. Just ignore it, because the one with the link. Just ignore that.
Oh no, and I was going to say send an email. Otherwise, I'll forget. So I'm glad you sent me an email, and that'll remind me to.
I replied that one, but I also sent you an email before class because you sent like the Zoom link, but there wasn't a link, and I was like, it's not there. But then I read like that is the same one we were using last week.
It would be the same module. So I'm not Zooming with the history of art class.
No, not this class. I meant, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same Zoom link. And as I think I mentioned in an email that I sent out this morning, they want us to use a more secure Zoom link than what you have now. So I'll be generating a different Zoom link that's a bit more secure. I think we'll be able to use it through the whole semester. So I'm going to send you it's pretty close, but it'll be a slightly different Zoom link for Thursday.
Okay.
We'll see if that works.
Okay then. Well, thank you.
You bet.
Jim, I left you a message earlier. I didn't know if you got it.
Oh, I did not. We'll talk about your projects after this class.
Yeah, right after is okay. I have an appointment a little bit later, but not.
We'll get on it, and I'll take a look, see what you're gonna make of this class.
Okay. Thanks.
You betcha. Oh.
Professor, did you get the letter from Joe Beth?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I already messed up one.
I have a question.
Yes.
So our first start site for our first assignment, is it going to be kind of like what you explained last week about the scavenger hunt to find the 9 listed bullets?
Yep, I added one other thing in there too, so there's 10 now.
Oh,
Yes. And I'll review that at the very end of class here, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
yeah.
Are we gonna be notified if the school approves for us to go in on Friday? How are we gonna know?
Not
Since
Friday. It would be next Thursday that we'd go on the field trip. So yes, so no field trip this week. If we are able to do it, it'll be next Thursday, which is pretty close to when they're going to have face-to-face classes come back anyway. That's why I push the field trip back that far. Typically, we'd be at Fort Baird right now with your cell phones exploring Fort Baird. But because of the coronavirus, well, we just have to readjust our schedules. Any more good questions before I start yapping again?
What's your favorite thing about Fort Baird?
I love, whenever I go, good question. What I love when I go to Fort Baird is just sensing the kind of the past presences of people who've been there. I really enjoy that sense of people putting in so much effort and time and work into a place, and all that effort and time over time just kind of dissipates, but there's still a presence there. And I love exploring Fort Baird for kind of that past human presence. So I think that would be it. Other people might explore it for shapes and lines, which is what you guys will be doing, but also a presence. And so, yeah, I love going into old buildings and exploring old forts, and just, yeah, I can just kind of almost hear the people who lived lives there in the past. So that's what I like. Good question. Any more good questions? Well, I'm going to zip through this because we are running out of time and it's there for you guys to go back to. If I was to ask you here, what is the dominant shape? What dominant shape do you see in this image?
I'm sharing your screen right now.
Oops, I'm sorry. Thank you. There, get back to screen share here. Where am I at? There. What's the dominant shape that you see in this image?
A triangle.
Triangles, exactly. Triangles after triangles after triangles. We've got, of course, this working as a triangle. This thing here is a triangle. Then we've got all these triangles within triangles within triangles. So, yep, this is a photo dealing with shape based on lines, and lots of triangles within this. We're going to get into texture. Texture is a very important part of photography. We saw the image of the gold miner and the sweat and grit on his back. That brought something to the image. And so, of course, we don't feel texture within a photograph. Actually, there's some very old photographic processes that allow you to feel texture within an image. They actually aren't two-dimensional. It's called carbon printing. And actually, there's topography within a carbon print. But for the most part, photographs are pretty darn smooth. You don't feel texture, but we can perceive or sense texture. And texture is what you want to bring to photographs because it's something that we can feel with our imaginations on our fingertips. And so textures become a part of a surface, but they add to that surface. And so when you're out, look for textures and include those textures within your photograph. And that then will give us a greater sense of what is there. Whether it's rough textures or smooth textures, look for textures, because as viewers, we can almost feel the roughness of this bark on our field trip, on our fingertips, where we can feel the smoothness of this apple on our fingertips. So look for textures when you're out exploring. And Fort Baird is full of textures. That's another thing I love about Fort Baird, are all the textures. But here, this elephant is just made up of wonderful textures that involve us, the viewer, more into the photograph. And then, of course, we've got kind of the shape of the head at work here that I like. We've got all these different shapes at play within the head and kind of trunk of the elephant here. So a lot to look at when you're looking at photograph, and a lot more to consider when you're composing a photograph. Pattern. We humans love pattern. Our brains seek out pattern. And so look for different patterns in the landscape as you are exploring, and we'll respond to those patterns. And once again, I'm zipping through this a little bit more quickly because of time. Color is very important. The first assignment we get into with the digital camera will be all about color and the emotional quality of color. What does color do? And so I have here, think of your favorite movie and what colors come to mind. Does anybody know what this movie is? What this still comes from? Does anybody know where this still came from? What movie? Anybody out there?
No.
You got, yeah, the Grand Budapest Motel. I'm just going to show a clip of it here very quickly. And what I remember about this movie is not only the great acting and the humor, but more than anything. And I went looking for the opening scene. I couldn't find it. The opening scene has some amazing color. And so I'm just going to show a quick clip of this movie here, and look at how color works. It's a brilliant movie. Well, I think for so many different reasons.
Why do you want to be a lobby boy?
Who wouldn't? At the Grand Budapest, sir.
And so my life began. Junior lobby boy in training under the strict command of Monsieur Gustave H. Many of the hotel's most valued and distinguished guests came for him.
I love you.
I love you. She was dynamite in the sack, by the way.
She was 84.
I've had older. This was also when I met Agatha. She's charming. She's so charming.
Is he flirting with you?
Yes.
I approve of this union. I became his pupil, and he was to be my counselor and guardian.
The police are here.
Tell them I'll be right down. She's been murdered, and you think I did it. You're looking so well, darling. You really are. I don't know what sort of cream they've put on you down at the morgue, but I want some.
This is Madame D's last will and testament to Monsieur Gustave H. I bequeath painting known as Boy with Apple.
What?
Who's Gustave H?
I'm afraid that's me, darling.
If I learn you ever once laid a finger on my mother's body, living or dead,
I go to bed with all my friends.
you need to make a plan for your survival. Hide this. It's in code and you might need a magnifying glass to read it, but it tells you exactly where and how to find Boy with Apple.
I'm a baker. I'm not a fence, if that's the term.
I want roadblocks at every junction for 50 kilometers. I want rail blocks at every train station for 100 kilometers.
Get in!
I want 50 men and 10 bloodhounds ready in 5 minutes.
You can't arrest him simply because he's a bloody immigrant.
Take your hands off my lobby boy!
Do you get a sense how color really dominates that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely going to have to watch that. I'd never even heard of it before.
Oh, it's a joy to watch. And what I do remember about it more than anything is the color. And so color is going to be a very important part of this class. Let me get rid of this thing, and we're going to go back to, where's it at? I get lost on my screens here. There we are. So are we back to our Canvas page? Are you able to see that?
Nope.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm just going to continue on.
Yes.
Color affects how we experience the world. Contrast is another thing that you'll be considering. Light against dark, all these beautiful tones in between. So this is going to get into editing. Editing is a big part of photography, and we're going to hop into that pretty soon. But just get a sense of how different values, what I call contrast, painters call value, play out in different images. Form. What's the difference between shape and form? Any thoughts out there?
Shape is 2D, form is 3D.
Exactly. You nailed it. And so to give us that sense of that, this is shape, a circle. Form requires light against dark, as though you have, in this case, light going across a sphere. So to have form, you've got to have light. When we get to the face-to-face part of the class, I'll whip out some lights, and we'll see the effect of light coming straight onto a subject. That just gives us shape. But so here we've got light coming straight onto our subject, gives us just a shape. But when you have light coming in from somewhere from the side of your subject, you have a highlight, and then you have dark. And there are technical terms for all different parts of this form here that I'm not going to get into. The basic thing I want you to know is it takes a light to create form, because we need the contrast of light moving into shadow to give us a sense of that 3D effect that you can see within photographs. And so highlights into dark. Even on this previous image here, we've got highlights moving into darks. And so all this is representing shape, which is that sense of three-dimensional form. Form, which gives us a sense of three-dimensional quality to your subject, whereas shape doesn't have that three-dimensional quality. If this was shot straight on, we just see shape, but by moving the camera off to the side a little bit, we get a sense of form, we get a sense of depth. Form has depth, the illusion of depth to it. Oh, here's this frickin' thing I was looking for. Now you know what positive and negative space is as we play it out here. Composition, working in the rule of thirds, as we've talked about, so I'm not going to go into this. And I'm going to skip over this for now. This is just stuff for you to look over. And just more information about composition. So come into this and look at it. There's a lot more information on this slideshow than what I'm spending time here with. I'm just kind of hitting the highlights. We've talked about framing, active and passive framing. So hopefully you have a sense of that now. Getting in closer to your subject, whether with camera or editing in the digital darkroom, can create different effects. So think about cropping, whether with your camera or in the digital darkroom. Symmetry is something that we can talk about. There are two types of symmetry. There is symmetrical symmetry that tends to have a sense of stability and balance to it. So when we're talking about symmetry and we're looking at symmetrical symmetry, you could divide the image down the middle, and it's almost as though you're looking at a mirror image of one another. That is symmetrical symmetry. Tends to have a sense of stability to it. Symmetrical symmetry does. This, if we kind of divide it down the middle, we have a mirror image. Symmetrical symmetry. Versus asymmetrical symmetry. We still have balance, but no longer do we, when we divide the image down the middle, no longer do we have a mirror image. These type of photographs tend to be more dynamic visually versus something that is more stable. So think about, what do I want to do with symmetry? Do I want that sense of stability, or do I want a bit more sense of dynamic, of a dynamic quality to it? And perspective, I'm going to come back and talk about that later, just because of time. But what I do want to get at is this idea of, remember the second icon I gave you, where you walk around your subject, then you have a bird's eye view and then a worm's eye view. This is a worm's eye view. And this just makes the image look, it's just, there are different ways you can photograph a dog. This is just a visually exciting way to photograph a dog. That's what you're wanting for, that exclamation point at the end of those icons that I put on the whiteboard. This is the second icon. Move around your subject, then go high, look down on your subject, go low, look up on your subject. And here we have the worm's eye view looking up, and that makes for a dynamic image. This is a bird's eye view looking down. In photo 2 and 3, students can get in and use drones. So we have drones you can check out. And I teach students how to fly the drones and all that, and you can capture video or stills. But this would be like using a drone looking straight down. It's a very visually interesting image. So once again, rules are meant to be broken. What we've been going over are kind of, guides. But at the end of the day, think about what we talked about, rule of thirds, and are you going to use the rule of thirds or not? Here you can see this is less dynamic visually. This is a little bit more dynamic visually. So this is where the rule of thirds is working. Here, rule of thirds is working right here. More dynamic image than just placing the bee and plant smack dab in the middle. So working in the rule of thirds is really a beginning point when you're out framing the world with your camera. Then you're thinking about active and passive framing, foreground, midground, background. A lot to see out in that world. Here we have a line that's sweeping into our subject right here. The subject has been placed in the rule of thirds, not smack dab in the middle here. We've got these leading lines once again that are very, well, they're dynamic. They're adding energy to the image relative to horizontal and vertical lines. But there are times you want to place your subject right in the middle of the image. And it works. So the rules are meant to be broken when you're out with your camera. So any questions or comments on this that we've gone through thus far?
The picture of the dog was the person lying down in the ground with a camera. Then they just happen to have the best picture view of the dog.
There we go. So what was the question there, Izzy?
That one. Was the photographer like in the ground and the dog on top of something?
Exactly. No, dog doesn't have to be on top of something. Could be, but certainly the photographer is flat on the ground, and if the dog was drooling, the guy would be drooled on at this point. So yeah, that's just looking straight up at the dog. And that could be a wide angle. I'm going to be talking about wide angle, normal lenses, telephoto lenses. This could be a wide angle lens that covers a wider angle of view, but it also gives us a sense of greater depth in an image. So the lens you put on your camera actually has an emotional content. And that's something that you'll be introduced to through the semester here. More good questions. So let's hop out of this here and just come on back into here. Get out of the screen share. Here we are. So I'm just going to zip through some of these here. I'm not going to even render this. So we're back into Lightroom. And what are you looking at here? What are you seeing?
I kind of see an ocean a little bit.
Yeah.
I see the shape.
What is it? What else?
I see like a shape at the very distance.
Yeah, that very. If I was to ask you, Marcus, which is the organic shape? Would you say this is the organic shape, or would you say that this is the organic shape here?
The lines.
Okay, you could say that. I might say this is more of an organic shape. Doesn't really matter what it is, but it's a fascinating photo. What it is, in fact, is a spillover on a dam. This is water spilling down from a dam and then into the river here. And so photography can be very abstract and beautiful at the same time. Here we've got a dam again, not the same dam, but look at all the stuff we've been talking. Look at this image and now start to consider all the things that we've been talking about within composition. Perhaps the most dominant thing is this very graceful line. That to me is the most dominant thing, followed by these other graceful lines. These graceful lines are being broken up by these blocky shapes here, these rocks. And so you've got a lot going on here. Then we've got the shape of the lake here, created by the camera and also the lake and dam itself. So there's a lot to look at when you are out with your camera. Oops, I skipped over that. So if you're just photographing a dam, look at all the things you could photograph that are visually interesting. How are you putting all these elements together into an image that we, the viewer, want to spend time looking at? And so this is just a walkway, a stairway going up the dam here. We've got all these geometric shapes at play here against then the organic shape of the shapes and textures of the rock into which this dam is built into. Here we've got a graceful leading line. Leading lines bring us into an image. Then we've got texture at play here. Then we've got over on this left-hand side, we've got different shapes at play here. And so lots of things to be looking at when you're out with your camera. So just going out and looking at a road can be fascinating with your camera and all the visual elements that make up that road, from the road dots that are put on there to the elements that engineers put in to keep up the hillside. These are visual interests to us, the viewer. And so the world is full of photographic composition out there. Shadows make lines, of course. So in your assignment, I asked you to photograph light and shadow. So you'll be looking at shadows to play with. We're going to be looking at this photographer on Thursday. We've got a video to play, but he is a master of composition. And just amazing image here. These strong lines. The thicker a line is, the more dominant it is. The thinner a line is, the less dominant it is. And so they're not only do lines play out horizontally and vertically and diagonally, but now you're thinking about the length of a line, the thickness of a line, and how dominant those lines play out in a photograph. Lines can be chaotic. Nothing but lines here, showing the chaos of war. So lines have different emotional content to them. And how are you going to be using lines within your photograph? And so we've got this hard line here another line, another line, another line, another line. In between these lines, we've got other lines. So once you start to look at photos as lines that then make up shapes, you take that into the three-dimensional world you're exploring with your camera, and you'll be looking for those lines and shapes. In the decisive moment when you go click, exclamation point with your camera. Yeah, this guy, he's amazing. You're gonna love his work on, you're gonna love, I think, that video on Thursday. But yeah, what he does with lines and composition is just stunning. The photographer we're gonna look at today, Michael Kenna, is right here. And I think I'm gonna shut up and put that video on and have you guys and finish the class up with that. So we've got more to talk about. I'll sum up lines. Here's a leading line right here. This whole thing is a line leading us into this couple having their picnic. And so we've got plenty to talk about. Quality of light within photography, we'll be talking about that. And your job, once again, I usually show these up on a screen. That's why they're showing up so small here. Something I just learned. Your job is, how are you going out and exploring the camera with your world? I mean, how are you exploring the world with your camera? This is Mary Ellen Marks. I love her photography. We'll look at her photography. But this is a line right here. And this kind of encircles her young daughter. Here are some other lines, implied lines back here, these crazy chickens running around. And so break the world up into lines first. And looking at images is so much fun. Yeah, we'll look at her work a little bit more. We'll look at, you know, just a lot of different work through the semester that I think is pretty damn fascinating. You saw that. But we just break the world into its compositional elements. We'll start to make very interesting photographs. Oops. Moving through. Here's the effect of, yeah, I've got, this is a big talk. I'm running out of time, so I'll shut up and get the video playing here. And that is drat. Did I bring up the wrong one? I had the movie all set up. Let me hunt it down. And I have a link to this video on the on our Canvas page. Oops, videos, Jim.
Place like France, it's everywhere. It's on the seafronts, it's in the wineries, it's in the old chateaus, it's in the formal gardens, it's in the cities. There's a wealth of material. I mean, I've photographed there for, what, 40 years, and you know, I could photograph there a few more lifetimes. It's endless. I think if there was one country, if I had to choose one country to photograph in, it probably would be France. I can't describe it too much. It just kind of keeps going on and on and on. There's so much to photograph, so many pictures to come out of France.
So I think when a lot of people think of your work, they think of your Asian work, the Japanese work, the minimalism, the sort of quiet, clean lines of that type of landscape photography. It seems that with your French pictures, the other half of your photography, in a way, comes through. The influence of Brassai, of Sudek, of Bill Brandt in particular, which you don't see quite so much in the Asian work and other work. I just wonder, A, if you agree, and B, if so, why France in particular makes you photograph in this slightly different way, and why, and then why Japan and other places make you photograph in that particular way.
I truly believe we're all, very much products of influences, and I have actively emulated many other photographers. I am English, brought up in the north of England near Liverpool, so my heritage is really European, and all the initial influences photographically were European photographers. You've named pretty much all of them: Sudek, Brandt, Auger, Stieglitz from America, but Giacomelli. And so if I'm photographing in with European subject matter, having come from European heritage with European influences, the images are bound to have this feeling of being European, basically.
Yeah.
I would study Josef Sudek. I would go to Prague and I would look for places he photographed, why he photographed them, how he photographed. I did the same for Bill Brandt. I went to the north of England. I photographed around Yorkshire and Lancashire. A lot of my night photography came out of Bill Brandt's work. With Eugene Auger, I went to France and studied the Notre Gardens, Paris, again, the places where he actively photographed. This was an important part of my photographic education. Going to Asia in the mid-80s was very insightful. It was a whole new culture for me. The fact that, the language was different, it was calligraphically different. Things seemed to read from right to left rather than left to right, bottom to up. There was this kind of feeling of Zen simplicity, of haiku. And it's something that touched me very deeply. It's something I had been doing in some ways. Some of my early photographs had a haiku feeling to them. It was about suggestion rather than description. So I often photographed in mist, for example. Going to Japan really gave me a whole different influence. And I would say if I looked at my career, there's kind of the first half is European and the second half is Asian. And I find more and more I've been photographing in Asia. And, and then I would come back to Europe and continue photographing. And I think actually in the later images in Europe, there's a strong Asian influence, which is not there at the beginning of the career so much. See, something like this could be in Hokkaido. It's it's graphically very, very streamlined, beautiful. It's about design. It's about very few elements. It has that essence of haiku, basically.
That slightly leads me into my next question, which is that throughout all of your pictures, really, there are no people. I just wonder whether you could explain why not, essentially.
I don't like people. You should know that by now.
and also in Paris, how you avoid them.
I often use the analogy of the stage that, I like to photograph before the characters, the actors come on the stage and after they've left. I like the presence, the atmosphere that's left, the kind of the tension. We all go to, concert halls, whatever. And when the band, the orchestra is warming up, there's a certain edge. And we can use our imagination to kind of create scenes on the stage. And this is essentially what I like to do. I like to present a stage and invite a viewer to walk into that and create basically finish the photograph, create their own photograph. Technically, how that happens with me, of course, is that I use a lot of long exposures. So even if there are people in the photograph, they disappear. And I do that all the time. Sometimes I spot them out with my retouching brush afterwards. But I just find in the Victorian age of photography, figures were used essentially to give scale. So they would place figures and then we'd say, how big the bridge is or how big the tree is. But a lot of my work is about enigma, about whether it's photographed during the day or photographed at night, how big or small something is. And they're also, they're timeless in a sense that, this is not 2014. This could be, 1814, photography being created then. they're not so specific. And I find that putting the figure into the photograph somehow focuses the attention on that person, on that scene, on that time. It gives scale and perspective to the whole scene, which doesn't interest me so much.
Yeah, interesting. Are you interested, despite all of that, in narrative in your pictures at all? Do you find yourself interested in the story of the place and the people that might have inhabited it or used it, or do you find yourself mostly interested in form and shape and so on?
I find that I feel I act more as a kind of a medium. So I don't need to know the whole history of a place. I mean, I have done projects where I've really studied what has happened there, but I like to present the scene so that other people can use their own interests to come into it.
I see. Yeah. Well, my favorite one. What I want to do now is just focus on 3 pictures that are in the show that you can all see a bit later, you've probably all seen already, and just find out a bit more about them. So this is the fantastic, I'm sorry if you can't see, but this is the fantastic full moonrise in the Chausey Islands in France, which is the great sort of trajectory of the moon captured on in print. Can you tell us a bit about this and how you did this and what the story was?
Well, I mentioned that many of these photographs that you see here were actually commissioned in some way, shape, or form. I've had many commissions in France to photograph specific areas. Sometimes I'm doing advertising. The Calais lace factories I photographed on my own, but this is, for example, from Chateau Lafite. So they commissioned me to photograph. A lot of them are the Chausey Islands. I was commissioned by the French Coastal Commission to spend 2 weeks in this archipelago. And
where are they in France, Michael?
They're very close to Grandville. They're in the Channel, basically.
Where are they?
Well, they're in the Channel. Yeah. Go to the Guernsey Island and keep going. Okay. You'll find them. But it's French territory, so we don't really hear about them very much. Very few people live there.
Right.
So it's this huge collection of islands that at high tide disappear. And at low tide, you can see there. There's a big aquaculture there of fisheries, shellfish, seaweed, and so forth. So for this particular photograph, I attempted it 3 times with 2 cameras each time because I use film cameras. I don't do digital. I can't actually see what's happening. This exposure is 6 hours. I never quite know, where the moon is going to come from, where it's going to end up. It's all, guesswork based upon experience. And most of the ones, the moon shot off the edge or it started somewhere else. It didn't quite work. And this one worked out absolutely perfectly insofar as, the moon just ended up right in the top corner.
Is this, and you have to go and look at the print because it's difficult to see.
Yes.
Is this an aeroplane's lights winking?
Yes, it's an aeroplane here. An aeroplane or a helicopter.
Yeah, it's absolutely marvelous.
Yes.
You just go and look at that, see the winking lights going through the picture.
There's something wonderful about photographing at night insofar as it is unpredictable. You can't actually sense what's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 hours. Sometimes you do get, I photographed many night scenes and you get helicopters and planes forming all sorts of strange lines. As the Earth moves, of course, they leave star trails. Presumably there was a light cloud at some point, and that's why this is misted here, because the moon kind of dissipates a little bit. And basically the tide has come up and gone down during that period of time, so you can see some islands.
So moving on, this is another place that I just your work is all about atmosphere, Michael, and I actually googled this place earlier just because I thought I'd show an image of it.
Yes.
And actually outside of your photography, it didn't look quite as exciting. It's a beautiful building, but it's sort of a cold, like a day photograph of it. I didn't think worth repeating, and it's testimony to your photography. You've made the whole thing sort of extra romantic and atmospheric and exciting. But nevertheless, it's an extraordinary building. Can you tell us a little bit about this? And
I came across this by good fortune. I'd been working with a press in San Francisco, and they were doing a project on this, Les Deserterettes. This had been an abandoned estate for many, many years. It was completely overgrown. An architect named Olivier Chopin de Janvry, I believe, bought the estate for 1 franc in those days, in return for his guarantee that he would completely restore it, which he did over the following years. I was fortunate to get there in 1988. just when the restoration was starting, just when they were starting to clean the place up, just when you could get there. And it felt as if there were ghosts and presence, and it was kind of slightly haunted, and it was just a wonderful resonance of atmosphere. There was tension, there was the patina of age, there was just a beautiful quality about the place. And I spent many weeks, I would keep returning. I photographed continually. It's a fascinating place. And then they restored it. And I came back the following years, and it was fascinating to me, something I already knew, that in the process of restoration, all the interest somehow disappears. It's this wabi-sabi concept, the idea of imperfection, the idea that things are not just so clean and perfect and wonderfully, it gets boring somehow. And so I was never really able to photograph it again. I mean, I went back and photographed, tried to photograph, kept trying to photograph. And it's, as you say, it's kind of not, it's like a museum now somehow. It's completely clean, you can go visit, but it doesn't have that atmosphere, that kind of walking back in time somehow.
I think you captured it brilliantly, because I felt the same thing today. And I just thought I'd talk about the feet pictures, because I like wine, and and I know you like wine. So and also it's an interesting part of your work, and you still, despite being incredibly successful and influential photographer, you still do a lot of commissions and so on and so forth. So I'd like to hear about this commission and what it was like to photograph this.
Well, this was
amazing vineyard.
Well, Chateau Lafite, Baron Rothschild, he has commissioned a photographer, I think, for 35 years now, each year, to do his New Year's card. And this is not like a little card that this is like a big 3-piece card that has the whole history of the vintage that year, which presumably he sends out to all the people that collect his wine. And there's a large audience. And so I essentially turned up on a Friday at 4 o'clock. I met the chief wine master, who said, here's a house, the fridge is full of food, drink anything you want in the cellar, and we'll see you next week. And that was it. And it was absolutely great. I had complete carte blanche. I could wander anywhere I wanted around the estate, into the cellars, and I got to taste.
Hey, my boy.
What wine did they give you in your cellar?
Well, the best one was the Chateau Lafite 1995, which I googled. £1,700 of wine. But don't tell anyone about it. I took it home. But I did drink a lot of good wine. So most of the photographs they're still in focus, not all of them. So I would literally go out at night and place cameras around the estate and photograph, these beautiful trees, clouds, and the vines and so forth. And this particular photograph was actually made from the bathroom window of where Baron Erich Rothschild lives. So he has his kind of castle up on the hill. And then down below, this was the old village of Chateau Lafite. And his wife has a painting studio right here. And so that's what that is about. But yes, commissions are great when they happen. Yeah, I love commissions.
Okay. So I could pick pretty much any picture in this show, but I thought I'd pick this one because I want to talk a little bit about your passion for and your appreciation of printing, darkroom printing. I mean, I know that it's a big part of your work. Perhaps you could just explain to everybody why and how you came about this particular kind of this passion.
Well, printing is something I've loved since day one. I think even when I was at school, I was in charge of. I was the head printer when letterpress printing, before photographic printing. But something about this, just kind of two-dimensional surfaces with lines, shapes, tonalities printed on it just drives me wild. And so I've been very fortunate to have chosen a profession where I get basically everything that I want. I get to travel, which I absolutely love traveling. I get to photograph at all times of day and night. I see interesting places, and I get to spend hours and hours on my own in a darkroom, usually listening to a book on tape or something. So I believe there are infinite variations that one can make in any scene. You get 1,000 photographers, they should come up with 1,000 different photographs because we each have our own individual perception and imagination. And I believe it's the same in the printing process. I could never give my negative to somebody else to print. I'm sure they would have a very good print, but it wouldn't be my print. It wouldn't be my interpretation. There is just so much you can do in the darkroom. A lot of it is very, very subtle. But this particular image, you know, and it's interesting because this is a 2000 image. At the time, I printed 3 other variations, totally different photographs. I never printed this one. It was only when the book project came along and I was going through my negatives that I found this negative and printed it. And it's because on the contact sheet, it's just completely soft and very calm and very gray. And it didn't look very interesting. But taking it into the darkroom and building up the contrast and you know, playing with these shapes down here and getting just enough tonality and working with these beautiful stormy clouds. It's in the darkroom. You know, it's in the negative and it's in the darkroom. And even the original scene didn't look like this. You know, I just don't remember it in this kind of dynamic way. So you can create things in the darkroom, and for me, it's an integral part of the whole photographic process.
Yeah. And my last question before I see if you guys want to join in a bit is, if you were talking to your 20-year-old self, setting out as a photographer, and I really ask this in case there are any photographers here, young photographers looking for some, you know, a few tips. What advice would you give yourself now that you've been doing it for?
I think you need to work 25 hours a day instead of 24.
Yeah.
It's basically, a lot of it is hard work. I mean, I'm absolutely driven and passionate about this, you know, and I'm very, very fortunate. I understand. I have great appreciation for the fact that I somehow ended up in this profession that is so wonderful. But as a result, it's consuming. And as a photographer, you need to work all the time. It's not something you can do on the weekend. It's not something you can do, you know, now and again. In a way, it's a bit like playing a musical instrument. That, you know, you need to be on it all the time. You know, it takes years to get to the point where you don't even know it's a musical instrument. You can play with your imagination. And photographically, it's the same. You get to the point where you don't think technically anymore. It's not even, you have a camera, you have film, you have exposures and light, but you don't even, it's just so, that goes away. You use your imagination, you connect with your scene. I often say you have a conversation with what you're photographing. It becomes a kind of almost an existential experience in itself, regardless of all the equipment. So I can have a conversation with a new person. Sometimes it's a bit predictable, sometimes exciting. You don't know what you're going to talk about. The conversations I really like to have are with the same person many, many times. People I've known for years and years and years. The conversation is deeper somehow. It's more intense. It kind of, the roots are deeper. And so it becomes more interesting. There's a kind of a friendship, there's a relationship, there's a history. That is why I can keep going back to those places.
Very much.
So any thoughts on Michael Kenna?
His narrative or story, it's very complex and different than, for example, the painters like Picasso, for example. He said that he looks at the subject and he doesn't even think about the techniques anymore. He just like does it by instinct.
That's a very good point there, Izzy. This camera here, are you looking at me or something else now?
You.
Okay, good. This camera here, it's a pretty bloody technical piece of equipment. And what you don't want to be doing when you're out photographing is saying, okay, I focus here. That's going to be the f-stop, and that gives me a longer or shorter depth of field. And what is my, you don't want, ideally, you're just reacting to the subject, whatever that might be, and you're letting that flow through your equipment. And that's all. You're not thinking about your equipment. So photography takes a while to get to know your equipment, to where then it just becomes not even a thought. It's just something that is capturing something that you want to communicate. So good point there. It took him many years to get to know his equipment well, to where it now is just seamless, from reacting to a scene, to capturing it, to then printing it. And as you heard him talk about, printing, and that could be either in the traditional darkroom or the digital darkroom, editing your images is the second part of creating the art of a photograph. And well, you'll be doing that. And just like organizing the compositional elements within your viewfinder, you're editing for certain emotional content. And so that'll be in the future. Some other thoughts about what he said about photography and maybe his approach to photography.
It's like my dream job because he said he just gets to spend all his time outside away from people, like kind of doing his own thing. So that seems to be pretty awesome.
That would be a pretty darn good dream job there, Caitlin. Where would you go in the world with your camera if you could just go anywhere with it?
I guess maybe after today I'd head to France.
There you go.
See what the hype is about.
Exactly. Some other thoughts. He talked about atmosphere. What was atmosphere all about?
I assume that means what feeling the image gives off.
Exactly. And where does that atmosphere come from? Jessica. Was it Jessica who made that comment?
No, it was me, Desiree.
Okay, Desiree. Gotcha.
It would come from things like the surroundings and like what's portrayed and what it looks like. Things like buildings, for example, would have an age to it, so it would have a little more of an atmosphere of sadness because there's like kind of a desolate look to it. Or say somebody took a picture of flowers, that would have an era of more like calm to it because it has kind of a nice colorful look to it.
Good. Right on the nose there. Atmosphere is just that kind of the feelings that are infused in an image, the content and more feeling that's infused in an image. And
they kind of
go ahead.
They kind of showed it like when they showed the picture of that building in the daylight versus his in the nighttime with the dark shadows and everything.
Yes. And it was literally night and day difference, wasn't there? An atmosphere. And that atmosphere not only comes from the subject matter, but it also comes from the photographer, the artist. And that's going to be the time of day you photograph, once again, how you're composing your images, and then how you're editing and printing those images. So atmosphere starts with the artist and then continues through the process up into the point where you're even framing the image. The frame can bring a certain atmosphere to it. So when you're out photographing, consider atmosphere, that which you're feeling from the image or from the subject matter, and then how you're going to bring that to the image. So atmosphere is very important. Well, we're 2 minutes over, darn it. And I was going to get into the assignment, but let me just talk about the assignment on Thursday. That'll give you the weekend to get out with your cameras and explore. We will continue on with more composition, and then we'll get into the digital camera a little bit on Thursday. And that's it. Any questions or comments?
No, sir. Thank you.
You betcha. Well, have a good rest of the day, and I will see you Thursday.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You bet. So Amelia, you're there. Let me go ahead and stop the recording here. Make sure I don't push a wrong button.